Not working. It was fine before. See, she's talking and there's people in their thing. It's not.
We're on a break.
Okay, Bob.
What is that? What's going on over there?
That was interesting. Sorry.
Okay, dude.
Just give it a little bit, a few more seconds here.
So we can see the presentation still.
Yep, we're good.
Okay, perfect. We switched over because Ruth and I are switching roles.
That's a very good slide of the developmental versus chronicle ages. That's very helpful.
Yes, we like that one too.
Well,
I'm
especially
not gonna lie, my moose is my favorite though.
Moose. Well, because our kids at 18 leave care, and we
Yes.
often push to say they're not really 18.
Yeah. Does
Right?
does that work? Can you make a case for that?
Yeah. We've had some success where they either stay in care for another year,
Okay.
longer, go to adult services. But we've had other cases where they just like kind of ditch them, and the kids are just left, and it's
awful.
It's pretty horrible, right? Because they just can't function yet in the
Yeah.
world we live in.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we're fighting for as well, because it's not fair. You would never take a 9-year-old, even though they're 18, a 9-year-old, and say, okay, go live on your own, go do this by yourself, right? Like you never would do that. And unfortunately, they just need more time to catch up. They need that time. So I advocate really hard for that, and I always use that that kind of language. And I'm like, no, like my son is 12, and I said, no, he's a 6-year-old, and I want you to view him like a 6-year-old, even though he talks like a 21-year-old. You know what I mean? But I want you to see him as that 6-year-old. And you know what? Sometimes he's 2. So what are we talking about? Right? So it's okay to have you could take that with your next, fight.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, like the catch up period, there's kind of, the other kind of rule of thumb thing is that the catch up is not until, what is it, Ruth, like 45?
Yeah, it's around 40 years old.
Yeah.
For an FASD. They tend to catch up around 40. So that's when they're about 20 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there any questions or anything before we start, or do we want to just move on? All good? Okay. So for my part, I like to be very interactive. So, please jump in, talk, raise your hand. Let's really individualize this experience to you guys, to us on here right now. We've all heard of early interventions being key. And that's a huge part of what we talk about as well. It's okay to look through an FASD lens for everybody, but your FASD kiddo or adult or youth can't change the way that they are. So the environment has to change for them. As foster parents, or get as much information as possible before the child comes into your care. I'm sure that's what happens, but dig. You know more now about FAS and how it may present. Ask the questions. Don't be shy to really kind of question through that lens, because like Jennifer was saying earlier, majority of our kiddos are not going to have a diagnosis. They're not going to get diagnosed. In Peel, which is where I'm from, the age is 6, and right now we do not have a diagnostic team in the Peel region. So after 6 years old, it's going to be hard for families to get that kind of a diagnosis, or even for you to advocate for a diagnosis, unless you go outside of Peel region, and that's if you get it, right? Getting that diagnosis is important, but it isn't the end all be all. It helps you. So it helped me as a parent. I did go through the foster system with my son, and I did not know anything about the alcohol exposure prior to I heard of FAS through some studies that I did prior to, like, in my life, but I never heard of FASD. And like one of I think it was Donna had the story. The home was excellent, but out in the community was a wreck. So he would go to daycare. It's all falling apart at daycare. They want to, get rid of him, and so forth. Every day, come home, come get him. We can't manage with him in the community. So we got the diagnosis at around 6, when he was about 6 years old. And when I got that, I cried. I literally cried, and I was happy because I finally, it fit, it made sense. And he was misdiagnosed. So a lot of our kids do go through a misdiagnosis with severe ADHD, ODD, and we gave him medications, and medications weren't working. And that also goes back to what Jennifer was talking about with, and I think the question before, with chemical imbalances and so forth. My son doesn't have an ADHD brain. He has FASD. So a lot of the medications are for ADHD. And that is a chemical imbalance. But if you don't have a chemical imbalance, and they're trying to balance chemicals in your brain, it sets off other issues. So sometimes it can take a long time to get the right cocktail or mixture of medications to support the child's needs. Like, it took us years to find where we were. So it's just really thinking about asking for what you need, even before that child comes into your care. And then after, asking for the supports that you need to further the support.
So Ruth,
Yes.
we had a question, and another excellent question about whether or not if mom didn't drink and dad did, can it affect the child? So just before we keep going with the presentation, the answer kind of is we don't know. So the evidence, like I said, I mentioned evidence in rats before, where they gave the male rat some alcohol and it affected the sperm. We know that there has been some evidence in humans where if dad drinks, it can affect, say, the heart of the fetus. So there is some evidence, but whether or not it's FASD, we just don't know yet. There's some research going on though, which is, hopefully at some point we'll have a better answer, but yeah, it's unclear.
Yeah. So one thing you will never get is a diagnosis of an FASD because dad was drinking. They have done studies, like Jennifer was saying, on rats, and it did change the sperm, the genetic makeup of the sperm and so forth. So what we tend to educate, or what I educate my kids with, and I will teach my son as he gets older and it's the right time, is that you also play a role in the development of your child. So I think if we just start having those conversations around responsibility with alcohol consumption, it can't hurt, and it does send a message, and it also takes that stigma away from it's mom's fault. Yeah, right. It's a partnership. It took two to make a baby. It's that partnership, And also, if there are other issues around, like mom say, drinking and so forth, it supports her if her partner abstains, if it's something that socially she loved to do, and now she no longer gets to do that because the baby, it jeopardizes the child. So it's just changing how our society's way of thinking and supporting pregnancies moving forward, I think is a healthy way to kind of look at that, if that answered the question. Was there another question?
But we were commenting on it would definitely be, Helena said it'd be definitely an interesting twist if it's possible for dad to change the baby by having drinking and not always mom, right? I mean, I'm sure some of this plays into the sexism that is rampant in our society. But again, I feel like that maybe you're 100% correct. I feel like we could do a whole other presentation on discussion on stigma and sex. Anyway.
Very true.
Yep.
So,
but
yeah. Great questions, great comments. That's what I love. I feed off of that. So please keep them coming. As Jennifer was saying before too, like we want everybody to kind of look at every person as an individual, and that includes especially our FASD kiddos, because we like to say that their behavior is a language. Well, I love to say that. A lot of people don't. They say behaviors are not. It slips me right now, but I like to use that their behaviors is a language, and that's what I use with my son when advocating for him, because I've learned that through his behaviors, it's so interesting. And please chime in if you foster parents have dealt with this. He absolutely has no verbal skills in the morning. I will wake him up, and then it'll be like a lot of groaning and baby babble, I guess I will call it. And at first I was so like, why are you doing that? You come on, get up, let's go. You can talk, tell me, let's go. And I realized after years of doing it wrong, he can't. He absolutely cannot speak in the morning. And if anybody knows my child, he can speak. He doesn't stop talking. So I started to realize that his behavior, the way he was behaving, is telling me a story. He also does a few other things that made me further kind of realize that his behaviors are telling me he's talking to me through that behavior. So I put him in. We started sign language. I was like, okay, if you don't have the verbal words, let's sign, because I'd be talking to him and I'd be saying, X, Y, and Z. And then he would be like, I'd be triggering him all the time. He's triggered. I'm like, but what did I do? What did I say? What happened? So I started to use sign language. I took no was a big trigger. And I took no completely out of my vocabulary. And I just would sign. And he'd be like he would just accept that. And it would just, it kind of grew from there, that whole part there. So one of the things he likes to do is crawl under tables and stuff like that. And then I was like, okay, well, what 12-year-old is going under tables and doing this stuff? So I was like, okay, draw the connection. He's not 12, I'm sorry. He's probably at a 4-year-old. So how am I going to interact with him? So I'd get down on my knees and I'd talk to him at a certain level, just like how I would talk to a 4-year-old child. So just recognizing that their behaviors really is a language. And when you learn the language of your kiddo, you can then take that and put it out into the community. You can use that with the teachers. I do that a lot with the teachers. Oh, sorry, Jennifer, can you switch a slide for me, please?
Probably a no.
Oh,
Did you get it? Did you get it?
no,
I did. Sorry, I switched it.
I'm not seeing anything.
Oh, okay.
We can see the developmental and chronicle age slide, and then the other slides on the side that you would scroll through. So I don't think it's on speaker or presentation mode.
That's interesting. It's showing me presenter view. All right, let's try this again. Sorry for our technical difficulties here.
This may sound like a really simplistic question, but teenagers with FASD, are they at a higher risk of consuming alcohol?
Well, they say, sorry, Jen, do you want to talk or?
That's a good question. You please do talk. I mean, I think it leads into it's part of this vulnerability and pleasing people and peer pressure, right?
Yeah. So exactly, like because they are vulnerable and they want to please, they want to do and be accepted by their peers. So a lot of outing the fires then would be anticipating what is coming. Because if you have, okay, so my son is in grade 8, he's going into high school. I'm already thinking way ahead. I'm like, okay, I have a 7-year-old who's going to be in high school with 14-year-olds who, you know, I mean, they're experimenting. Well, you know, how do I deal with what's coming next? And it's really supervision. What's going to save these kids is supervision. You're not going to stop that maybe the one time that they're going to have the alcohol, but if they're around people who are a lot who have their best interest and understand their disability, they're more likely it's gonna happen later on. If they're susceptible to alcohol, it just depends on the person, right? The getting in front of things that will introduce them to these things earlier is going to be their saving grace, is how I kind of look at it, right? So putting in place a lot of supports, keeping your network really tight and close knit. They have a mind of their own. This is why early intervention. If you get a child early and you can start to you can build their world, and that's what they know. But if they've already been exposed to things, it's a lot harder. But it's really keeping them active and away from the vulnerabilities that are out there, which can be their peers.
If we're talking about genes, though, Tyler, were you thinking from the genetic standpoint as well as the social?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what impact does that have on them if they're
yeah
like,
I mean, it depends, I think, as well, on because we're talking because that you know, that prenatal alcohol exposure is complex. It's, you know, frequency, timing, etc. Like there is evidence that alcohol dependence there are some genes involved with alcohol dependence, but you know, not all cases of FASD have arisen because of alcohol dependence, right? So so it's an interesting question, and again, it's one of those sort of complex, multifaceted things. So perhaps if there is a history of alcohol dependence in the family and that led to prenatal alcohol exposure, then there's some, you know, there may be some genetic sort of higher risk of alcohol dependence, but that's like that's the kind of most severe alcohol use case.
okay. We got one more question from Aaron and Donna.
Okay.
I was just curious, you had mentioned when it came to the social aspect of like susceptible to peer pressure, people pleasing. Something that I've found with children with FASD is that people who are around them, like the adults around them, don't really discuss with them their own diagnosis. Kind of like they kind of dance around the subject, they keep it to themselves more, like it's kind of feels like taboo to talk about with the child who has that diagnosis. Is there like, I don't know if this is something maybe we'll talk about later through the presentation, but there's like kind of recommendations on how to just like, is it to be, I mean, it might be kid specific, but to be blunt about it to the child, or kind of like just discussing it regularly? Like how would you kind of go about introducing that concept of their diagnosis to them so that they do understand what's going on?
So I think that's a great question, because that is one of the things that we experience as well. So I believe it's very similar to an adoption story. When is it the right time to tell your child of their adoption story, right? For me, it was as soon as my child was curious. He's like, well, I grew in your tummy, and then I had to have that story, right? Because you didn't grow in this, right? Sorry.
No, sorry, she's just talking to herself.
Okay. So it with FASD, it's what is their understanding and level where they're at. We also started so with our support group, we did a little workshop on teaching the kids about their own brain. And that is a very important thing to me, because I think it's part of advocacy and it's a part of acceptance. So in our group, we have, from 4 to 22 with FASD. And what we noticed in our group was that some of the teenagers, when they got their diagnosis, were not accepting of the diagnosis. And that's a challenge in itself. So that's how that kind of idea around teaching the kids about their brain so that they could advocate and talk to others about it came about. So the answer is it's an individual choice, right? Like, your kiddo that you're working with the best, and it can never hurt to understand yourself. So it's just how the delivery comes about. I would never shame my son's mom, and I would never tell him that it's something that was intentional, because whether it is or it isn't, it's neither here nor there. We're where we're at. This is what has happened, and this is basically what we do to move forward. Always using that strength base. You're an amazing person, which he really is. He's super funny. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use strategies with his humor, right? Because I think I'm capable of doing that for him, but he's not capable of understanding maybe if I gave him a sarcastic remark, right? In humor, he's not going to understand that. So really using their strengths for them to understand. But I agree with you. I think we definitely need to be talking about it, teaching them, and moving forward with that.
Yeah, agree.
Okay.
Can you see the groundhog?
I can see the groundhog. And this slide kind of goes into every day. We need to assume that every day is Groundhog Day for these kiddos, because some days, some weeks, some months are really good, but the reality is how much are they really retaining, and how much are they it's going by just habit, right? And I use this a lot, especially in school settings or social settings, to explain my son and to get the point across that for him, every morning is a different morning. If I go into his class, if he goes into class and he has a new student, it has rechanged that day. So everything he has to learn all over again. I'll give an example. They changed the classroom this year. They did not change his desk. he walked into the classroom and he bolted out of the room. And I said, well, what happened? What changed? And they said, well, nothing really changed. We did change the seating plan, but everything for him is the same. We've kept everything the same. I said, but you changed the room. So before you change the room, if you knew you were going to change the room, you should just let him know, you know, this is what's going to happen. Show him maybe the new seating plan ahead of time. Definitely have those conversations, because what he walked into was a brand new day, something he does not know. And then that fight flight response was triggered and out the door he went, because he did not recognize what he walked into. So let's assume that every day is Groundhog Day. I like to say start with less and then add in more, because if you add in a lot, it could be a whole bunch of different sensory things that you have to learn. But if you have less and you put one thing, it's one thing in at a time, then they can adjust and you can start to learn their behavior, which is part of their language.
Zoe, you got a question? You're on mute if you're trying to talk.
I know I had to run over to unmute.
Okay.
We just have a question. Just wondering what kind of supports there are out there for caregivers for FAS. Like, are there support groups, that type of thing?
There are support groups. I'm not sure if I guess are you guys situated mostly in what region?
We're like these parents are all over the place. It's like Southern Ontario and beyond.
Okay, so there are FASD workers that are in every different region in Ontario. The agencies, I don't know. For Peel region, we have ours. We have actually 2 in Peel region through Erin Oak Kids, which is a developmental center. So that is a resource that you can have access to, or you should have access to from Ontario. Again, talking to Tyler and his team as to what resources are out there for foster parents as well. There are quite a few parent support groups across Ontario. If you look on Health Nexus has their website, they have a list of support groups. So our support group is FASD Connection Peel, and we are in there as well. But any support group that does get funding is actually on that list, and you can reach out to those groups as well. Maybe Jennifer, if we can, or if somebody can, I can't really see on my end here, is if we could find the link for Health Nexus, they can actually and put it into the chat. It can be their list can be accessed through that, and support groups are a great way for everybody to kind of come together and share and be supported and find other ideas.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can update the chat with that Health Nexus.
Yes. Thank
I
you.
just threw Health Nexus in the chat for you. Just their main page, and then they have a bunch of resources.
And CAN FASD, I'm not sure if you're familiar with CAN FASD. That is also a great resource as well. A lot of information there too. Switch the slide, please.
I've switched it on my end. Can you see the change?
No, not yet.
All right.
Okay, thank you. So communication and building skills. So consistency. Consistency is key. In consistency in routine, in language, in your behavior, and in your environment, everything around you. So I've had to learn that creating that consistency across the board helps me at home, helps him in the community. And then it also helps me receive information back from the community. So I actually have a language diary. When we say certain things in our home, I write it in the book, things that he recognizes, and I allow, like I give that to who needs it. If I have a new respite worker, they read the book. They have access to the book at any time. His teachers, his principal, his vice principal, everybody I share this book with, because it is the common language that he understands and will respond to. And if you're changing that, again, it goes back to that Groundhog Day scenario. You've changed something, he's not going to understand it. He may appear, he can regurgitate that back to you and tell you what you said, but it hasn't registered, because since he's 6 years old, we've been compiling this language for him. An example of that is with confabulation. So I still have, that challenge with when my child is confabulating. Again, he is a 12-year-old and he does lie too, right? But for the most part, I chop it up to confabulating, which is filling in the blanks of a story that he's trying to tell you. And those stories get filled in with facts, or with facts that are not true to what has happened. So I know in our group, a lot of people say, well, our kiddos are lying and da 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 and so forth. And yes, I'm not going to say they cannot lie. They're children, like everybody can lie. But keeping language consistent helps with understanding when that confabulation is happening. I was going to give you an example. In our home, when he tells a story that isn't fully a true story, we call them spicy stories. And the spicy stories, they are like Frank's Red Hot sauce, that kind of spicy, all the way up to, Scotch bonnet spicy. And then we have our ghost pepper spicy in our house, right? So that language had to go to school, because they would call back and say, what, he was lying, or he's this, or you know what I mean? So I said, well, he does understand when he's telling a tall tale or a story that is not, like, if you use the words, that's kind of a spicy story, young man. And then give him, it's on what level of spice. So they wouldn't know that we do that in the home had I did not have our little book, our language diary. And that was very helpful to them. And it also brought humor when they were trying to, not make it escalate into something more than it could have been, right? Because he hears the humor, he knows I've mimicked the humor at home. It's not, it kind of calmed that fight flight response. And therefore he's more receptive to hear, yeah, you know what, go sit down, it's okay. That story is a little bit far-fetched. It also helps to start to recognize, again, that developmental age and where you go with what to say when he's crawling on the ground. Do I approach him and say, like, do I stand up and approach him and say, you need to get up off the ground, or you need to get up from under your desk? Well, no, in the book, I write down, this is the language that you're supposed to use. You get down nice and low and you talk very softly, right? And sometimes no words at all. Just reach out your hand, because that's part of language for him. And he knows, you reach out your hand, it means I need you to come. And you didn't have to say anything. So that book travels everywhere. That book gets written in, like when we change something or we add something, and they also add into the book, so that when the child comes home, I'm using the same language that they've now added to that book. and that'll stay like that. Can I get the next slide, please?
Can you see that? How to structure your routine?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So I have a question now, is like, what works for, if anybody would like to share, what works for your kiddos? And what are your expectations? Because we want to kind of talk about expectations too. So if anybody wants to kind of chime in, if not, I will keep going.
Am I allowed to put people on the spot, or is that dangerous? Naluka, can you just share what you text? Because I know you present super well. So
Sure. There's a FASD collaborative in Hamilton. So if anyone wants any information, they also have groups for parents that need support. But yeah.
Yeah, Hamilton has a great group. They have two groups out there, which is wonderful. They have an adult one and then a general one too. So excellent resource. So build in downtime after school and lots of physical activity. So routines coming home. That's another thing that I share across the board, is what does, when the child is transitioning back into the home, what does that look like for the child? So because we deal with a lot of sensory issues, the moment my child walks in through the door, all lights are off, there's no TV, there's really not much stimulation, just because for us, that wind down time is super important, because he's transitioning from he's trying to hold it together all day. He comes home, we were having a lot of outbursts then, and difficulty with him transitioning back home. So again, I had to figure out, okay, clear the slate, nothing stimulating him, and adding in one thing at a time. And then I found what worked for him is all lights off, no TV on, no sound. He comes home, he eats, because hunger was a huge issue, because I wasn't really hearing from the school that he wasn't eating his lunch. He actually was throwing away the lunch, so he was hangry. So food is on the table, he eats, and he sleeps for an hour before we go into the next activity. But that was, again, it took a lot of, what is happening? Something is wrong, because I'm getting this explosive behavior as soon as he walks in the door. He's yelling at me, and he's, things are just, I can't get any compliance whatsoever. Where do we go? So I knew something in his environment during the transition was triggering him. Sometimes it's the school bus. I had to take him off of a regular school bus, and he rides alone on the bus, because it was just too much stimulation for him to come back into the home. So really understanding that their language and their needs. Where else do we go?
We can add in that consistency again. I mean, so if you have that expectation that you want your kids to eat their dinner at the table, like, then you have to make all meals eaten at the table all the time. Don't make an exception one day for eating in front of the TV, because that's going to cause you some problems at the next meal when you want them back at the table.
Yes. Yeah, everything is very black and white with our kiddos. If you leave room for gray, you potentially set yourself up for to start all over, for that Groundhog Day effect, and that means reteaching them. So we have a designated chair. This is where he eats all of his meals. It may seem like, oh, you know what, that's too strict, or that's too restrictive, and so forth. But it's consistency. He knows where to eat. He knows, if I make a mess in this area, it's okay. That's my area. You know what? gotta clean it up. And, you know, everybody in the home understands, you know what, if there's rice and gravy and whatever on the table, just remember, you know, young man, come on over, you need to clean that up. And he's very compliant. He's like, oh yeah, okay, I just forgot. So keeping things very consistent, because the moment he sees chair, that specific area, there's something not right there, or he's forgotten something, he can figure out, oh yes, that's what mommy wants me to do, or that's what my sister wants me to do, or that's what, and that's across the board. Keeping that consistency is very, very, very helpful.
Yeah, we've got a comment here as well, Ruth. Someone from Amy, someone else shared the challenge of putting on socks before shoes. So trying the snow plow method to put a basket of socks by the door, so it's easier to pair tasks together to meet the responsibility. And that's such a great idea, because it's that observation of your kids, what they're struggling with, and then figuring out how to make the environment work for them.
Yeah, 100%. And even chores, make chores make sense too, because we have a chore method too. And, you know, as if he comes in the door, you know, we start at the beginning, you know, his chores are to put away the shoes. As he walks in the door, you put away the shoes. You're right in that area. He doesn't have to think about it anymore. It's taking that thinking away. And it just becomes developing those habits of what we would like them to do. Because to really expect that they're gonna say learn it, I'm not saying that they're not going to or cannot. I'm just saying, let's just take that away, that expectation away, and just think about creating habits, because they can more than create habits. Am I missing anything here? So again, I yeah, okay. Are we good here?
I think so.
Okay, so let's switch.
I mean, some of this we've already covered. The out in the community. You said, you know, your book for your young man goes with him everywhere. But you know, that modeling advocacy piece there is important.
Yes. And again, it's modeling advocacy. What does that look like? I think we talked a little bit about that earlier too.
Mhm.
So that they can have that language for themselves. So my son has now learned to say, I do have a brain injury. A lot of people were saying, like his peers, I should say, a lot of his peers were asking him, are you autistic? Are you autistic? And he's like, I'm not autistic. I have FASD. So, and it's just being able to allow him to feel comfortable enough to have that conversation. And that's, again, is through modeling, you know, letting them know, you know, yes, you've been diagnosed with FASD. FASD is a brain injury, and you will need, I let him know, you will always need external help, and that's okay. It's okay to ask for, is that okay for me to do that? Because it's better that you ask than you just do it and you get in trouble for it, or there's long-term consequences, right? So it's really just teaching that aspect, that your tools, your supports are your tools for success. And that's teaching the individual who does live with the disability. And for us to know and recognize as well that, you know, their successes are our successes, because we are advocating and helping them understand, and the world around them understand who they are. Supervision, I talked about supervision is key. It really is. Supervision, I cannot stress the support that you need for you and for them is huge. The supervision piece is going to keep them on a path that leads to the most success, in my opinion. And I think I believe there's not enough support in that area. for what their needs are. And that needs to change, that really needs to change. So if you can advocate, and if you see that it within your own homes, advocate for that when they go out into the community. So my son gets a lot of respite support because being out in the community isn't safe for him by himself. For me to do that, I feel like, I would be putting him at risk. And I let I hope I can say this, but I let my CAS agency know that, I'm like, listen, I'm putting this back onto you, the agency, because at the end of the day, you see the outcome of unsupervised vision things. And I'm a working parent. So, and I'm a single parent. I need eyes on because this is what he requires. So really having those open conversations with the agencies. And then next slide.
That's a bit about what we were just saying. We all need our teams.
Yeah, this and the team that you build again goes towards our kiddos, having them understand that they need their team too. They may never grasp that, and they may fight you on that. It's more likely they will fight you on it because I mean every teenager wants to fight you on your typical teenager wants to fight you on this, but that early conversation as to why these supports and how it can be like, I like to tell my son, I'm like, your worker is part of your toolkit. This is not a person that is here to tell me your business. This person is here for you to have the most success out in the community when your family isn't there. Right? And it's for you to just learn and to ask. It's okay. It's okay to ask, does this seem like an okay friend? Should I be talking to this person? Like normalizing those questions for our kiddos is huge. I heard this analogy of a play. When you go to a play, you see a beautiful production, but when you look backstage, it's total chaos backstage. And that chaos created the beauty that you see in being performed. Well, that beautiful performance is our kiddos, and the backstage is all of us that support them. So I really loved that analogy, and I share that with you all today. Because it's true, it takes a team. You need a team in order to help them to be the successful people that they're going to be or can be. And that team can look like teachers, your support workers, your family, friends, and people in the wider community. I've heard a lot of foster parents and kin families and adoptive families say, it's isolating. And it is. I was very isolated for a long time. My family did not understand at all about FASD, and he has a high IQ, intelligence. So they're like, he's fooling you. He's fooling you. You're literally buying and, drinking the Kool-Aid, and he's taking advantage. And I'm like, I had to fight and say no. And I had to put my foot down and say, no, you know what? I can't listen to this anymore. And I was completely isolated. And I couldn't go to Walmart. I couldn't do anything because the moment I'd go out into a stimulating area, I would have a child that's completely like lost running. I'd have to chase him. I'd have to grab him, put him under my arm. I didn't know if they were going to call CAS on me because, you know, I'm picking up this child and I'm trying to keep him safe. And I just literally froze. I would freeze, and, you know, and I'd be like, I can't go out in the community. I can't be outside. I can't do my work. I lost a lot of income, all this kind of stuff. But then I learned that I need a team. And I do have that team. Jennifer is part of that team, and she's been for many, many years, because when things were the worst, you know, she saw all of that. So it can be isolating, but if you have these conversations, again, if you get involved with a support group, that is part of building your team, right? Because then at least you have somebody to talk to and share. Yeah, so definitely important for both you and the children or child that you support. Can I get the next slide, please?
Ruth, can I just ask one thing, is just around, I guess this is for everyone, is a lot of our parents are really good advocates for their kids. The problem that I see sometimes is it rubs other people the wrong way. So schools, children's aid, they see them as being difficult when really they're just advocating. So does anybody have any like comments or tips around how do we advocate, understanding people are sensitive? There's a lot of feelings within children's aid and the school board. And how do we navigate that stuff? Because I feel like sometimes the parents kind of are seen in a bad light, but they're doing nothing wrong. So I don't know if anybody has comments on that stuff.
I can, oh, go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, basically, when you're advocating for a child, I think the best technique is to be very polite, very cordial with who you're talking to, because that's the best way to get heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Going in there angry, they're gonna trump you. Like it's never a great way to come together and be a team. So when my son went into grade 4, I kind of had enough. So I literally said, in a very polite way, you can have it the easy way or you can have it the hard way. It's totally up to you. And I had to say this to a principal. I had to say this to a principal. And she kind of looked at me and I said, because I will no longer be coming to save the day. I am going to be at work. I have to feed my family, because at this point, all of these phone calls that I'm getting and all of this time that I'm like, I used to sit in his classroom because they would want to send him home. And I said, no, if you send him home, he loves being home. He doesn't want to be here. So I would sit in the classroom with him and support. And then, I mean, eventually I did get some supports where we brought in an external child and youth worker who would stay in the classroom so that I didn't have to stay in the classroom. And I literally just had to put my foot down, and I had to learn that it's okay to bring, I have 2 huge binders. I have all of my reports. I have all of, you know, everything in one binder. And then I have another binder that has, you know, some stuff from the agency, some stuff from, I should show you guys my binder, but I know we don't have enough time. That literally is a whole other topic, is building the binder. But it works. Bring your resources with you to these meetings, and literally, like, you're not doing anything wrong. You're advocating for your kiddos, and everybody has to get on board, or else they're gonna feel the what you go through, because it is going to come out one way or another. It's either going to come out in the home or it's going to come out in the community.
I wasn't able to get it done.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, I do understand that whole advocating piece. One day you just have to say, you know what, I'm doing the right thing. And one way or another, they're going to hear you. And really using those points of, you know, I'll use another example. When I got the OT report, so an occupational therapist. So we've done three occupational therapy reports so far on his FASD journey. So the last one I got, his highest stressor was recess. What was happening every day? This child was going out for recess twice a day, and he scored a 5 out of 5 on the highest sensory for him. So I went to the school and I said, okay, this is what the report revealed. We no longer will be putting my child out for recess. We need to come up with a plan for what he can do inside the school, because this became his highest stressor. And for him to be out there is, you are torturing my child. And as his parent, I can no longer let that happen. And we made a plan. He is indoor. Only when my son actually turned around and he said, I actually like being inside. And I said, yeah, because it feels so much better on your body. I can only imagine, like, and I'm terribly sorry that you had to go through those experiences, but now I know, and I will let everybody else know. So those reports are key and gold. If you don't have them, ask for them, and then use those as tools as well when you go into these meetings.
Well, all of those things that Ruth is saying, that I'm sure you all are prepared because you've experienced this. So, you come prepared, come with a team building approach. I think it's fair to say, I would like to work with you on this for my child to go to school. And Ruth is always saying, your child deserves to go to school. She says that to me. My child does not have FASD. She has so I believe some sensory issues, but it's, I'm working through those, and it's, Ruth is saying, your child deserves to be in school. All our children deserve to be in school. And I think that's a great line. Please work with me because my child deserves to be in school.
And then self-care. So this was a really hard one for me. I've always heard and learned that, when you're on the plane, they always say, put your mask on before you, put on the mask of the person that you're with. And it's very true. Without you being taken care of or taking care of yourself, our kids they're not going to be as successful as they could be. So take that time to take care of yourself. That could mean, having a mantra, and, something that works for you to help you get through it every day. Because it is challenging. It's not easy, but I like to say it isn't easy, but it is so worth it. I absolutely adore my little guy, and I wouldn't change him for the world. Yes, this disability is here, but he's an amazing person. I just had to learn what he needed. Respite. I still have to learn this because I take my respite and I work. And working isn't respite. Respite is taking care of you and doing what you need and what feels good for you, so that you can stay in this for the long haul. If it means, if you love reading a book or you love going for a walk in the woods, maybe you love to hug a tree, do it, because it's going to fill you so that you can then pass that on, because you're always co-regulating, whether you know it or not, and several times a day, because our kiddos do fluctuate through those age variances that Jennifer was talking about. So it's very, very important to put yourself first, because that's basically their survival. You thinking about that environment. Well, if you didn't get enough sleep, or you didn't, eat well, or have enough water, or take that walk, or get that breath of fresh air, it's going to be hard for you to make those decisions and those choices that are so needed for them, because their brain, it's a challenge for their brain. So take a breath, enjoy, be super honest with what your needs are and how you can fit that self-care into any plan for yourself. And that's kind of where I go with self-care. So is there any questions at this point here? I know we're going over a little bit time, and I hope that's okay. I apologize. Next slide, Jennifer.
We don't have too many more. We're we're almost there. Have you got what is success and
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
So what is success? What is progress? Expectations, expectations set like future resentments, in the sense of I had to really learn that I have no expectations, and that is a challenge. I have to remind myself every day that it is a challenge for me not to have those expectations of my child, because I see so much potential. I see so much potential, but it hurts when every time I have to recognize that, you know what, today is not that day. He might be struggling today. He has really, really good days. He has really bad days. He has mediocre days. So I try to remind myself not to have those expectations. And that is hard, because I've been told many times, well, how do you say that you don't have any expectations of this child? Like, how do you expect him to thrive? Right? Well, that's how I expect him to thrive, by not having the expectations and making him feel the pressure of what I think is what for his life. Then what I think is, all I can do every day is set up the environment for success, and I'm okay with that now. But I have to work on it. I work on that daily. Success for me is that repetition. Since he was maybe about 8, we started with okay, it's now your turn to make the bed. Actually, he made my bed. It was my birthday, and he made my bed, and my bed looked like I made the bed. And I came home, and my kids did this whole thing for my birthday, and I walked in, and my bed was made, and I was like, wow. And my daughter goes, yeah, he did it. And I was like, he did not. I said, you guys are lying. Like, I did not believe. I said, because I make my bed every morning, I think, but this morning I didn't. And he made the bed just like how I would make the bed. And I was like, oh, well, guess what? You're going to start making your bed. And every morning I have to say, make your bed. I have a list, he has his list of what he needs to do before he leaves the room. So that's his visual. I also give him cues and prompts. You got to make your bed. You got to pick up the stuff on the floor. And then you go into the bathroom. Every morning it's the same thing. But since he's 8 till now he's 12, he has made the bed without me telling him to make the bed about 4 times in all those years. 4 times. That's what I call progress. That is what I call success, because by the FASD profile, he should not be able to do that. And he has done it 4 times on his own without nobody having to tell him. And I think that that's fantastic. People with FASD can definitely thrive. Be realistic at understanding their expectations and their strengths, and play on that, and that, to me, you'll see the progresses in when you look at it from that kind of a standpoint. I hope I'm making sense.
We love that strength-based perspective. It's super important for everyone.
Yes. Any questions, or should I go on to the next line? So again, recognize those successes and celebrate them. Another successful story I will just share was recently, was this week. There was loss at my son's school. We talked about the loss. Somebody passed away, and we talked about the loss. And he's very impulsive, so whatever comes to the brain comes out of his mouth. And he had made a comment that I would be viewed as very inappropriate. But we had that conversation and we talked about it. And then he turned to me and he said, "Mommy, I don't think I should go to school." And I said, no, he said, "Mommy, can I stay home?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "I don't think I should go to school." And then we had the conversation. And I think recognizing and celebrate, that was huge. That his decision to stay home, because he may say something to his peers, to his teachers, to others who are mourning now, or may perceive him as a lack of empathy, and so forth, was huge. That I called my workers, I called CAS, I called, the mental health worker, I called everybody, and I was like, this is what he chose to do, was to stay home so that he would not say something that might hurt somebody who's already hurting. But he chose to, I think the best thing for me is to stay home. And I thought that was wonderful. So I share that with you today too. Yeah, and just recognize that and give yourself a pat on the back that their successes are because of the things that you have done in their lives. And I always thank, and when I talk to foster parents, because it is a much needed role. We do not have enough foster parents, and what you do is absolutely amazing. And just remember that, our kids with FASD benefit greatly from your knowledge and your love and sharing your home with them. And that's the end of what I got to say. If there's any questions.
Yeah.
We're done.
I feel like I'm going to call my mom and ask her if she drank 41 years ago.
Oh,
I feel like every time I hear this, I'm like, some of these qualities I have, just like horrible, terrible now.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions, guys, before we kind of sign off, or anything else? I'm going to do a follow-up email to all of us with all the links and all that good stuff. And I know there's a couple slides I really liked in there, so I'm going to see if I can get my hands on those in private with Ann and Ruth. But anything else, we'll maybe just do 10 seconds of silence, if just see if anyone wants to talk or share something. If not, we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, I want to know, I have a question. Does FASD children experience things like stealing?
Yeah. They forget a lot. So, and they want to please. So I've gone through it with my kiddo. He, took some money, went to school because he wanted a Roblox card, a $25 Roblox card, because of all his friends are doing it. And he wanted to, he doesn't play Roblox, so he didn't need the card, but everybody was talking about it. And he also wanted to be able to talk about it too. So he took the money. Do they steal? They're not really thinking that it's stealing. They just want to get something that they want, if that makes sense. But it does come across like stealing. Like you and I would say they stole it. But in their minds, it's not necessarily coming from a place of stealing. Sometimes they do forget. Sometimes they walk into a store, they're holding on to something, put it in their pocket, and they're gone. And right there, I mean, they're getting in trouble for
Collectors.
stealing. Yeah.
We've got a collector's comment from Shara. I think that's right.
Yeah.
So
So-
does this, uh,
Sorry?
so does this happen often, or is it something that will eventually go away?
It can happen often with some kids, but yeah, it can. Majority of the children in our group, we have come across that they've taken things that are not theirs. This is why supervision is key. Having people supervise and be, watch them. I mean, I have cameras in my home, just so that I have extra eyes. If I'm in my bedroom, like my little guy will eat out all my cupboards. I'll be lying down in bed and I have my cameras on, and he'll come out of his room and I'll be like, go back to bed. And then he'll be like, okay. And it just turned, it was an extra set of eyes. And, it's just one of those things that I do, or I put in place just so that I can remind him, no, you don't get to go into the cupboards tonight. I see you, you need to go back to bed. And then he's okay with that. He's just like, I got hungry, I wanted to go get a snack, but the rule is, after a certain time, no, we don't go raid the kitchen. So yes. And then I've also heard other stories of, of a young lady who would go into the store and put things in her pocket. So one of the solutions that the counselor gave her was, these are your shopping pants, and they sewed the pockets of her. She's allowed to go to the store, but they sewed up the pockets so that she can't accidentally forget that something is in her pocket that she liked. So yes, if we can look at it with a little bit of humor, but also get in front of it,
Yes.
it's something they may do for all the time because they just forget. And then we need to help them put things in place so that they're safe.
And I guess for
Go ahead. Birthday
yeah,
girl.
I was thinking, like if they're stealing in the store, we could probably say stuff like, "Oh, we forgot to pay. We forgot to give it them. We have to pay for stuff like this."
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
When it comes good.
I was just saying that I took a boy to Zeller's years ago, and we left, and we got to my car, and he opened up his coat, and he had taken a whole bunch of stuff. And so what I did is I just said, that's like the FASD tax. And so we just throw them on. But oftentimes they'll do it without thinking that it's wrong or it's inappropriate. I wouldn't say that it's stealing. I just say they're taking things, but they don't understand that it's against the law.
That's
So,
right.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I was going to say one of the challenges for us is we have a 17-year-old young man, and the challenge is the chronological versus developmental, because he's very aware of what his friends have and other kids his age have, and getting towards that 18 and independence, and then balancing the functioning level, which is super challenging.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's one of those repetition things, it's giving him the language to advocate for himself as well, and saying, this is a disability that you have. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you, but it does mean that things will be slightly different for you. And it's hard. It's hard. There's no getting around that. It's going to be hard to get that in the brain, but
and I was
repetition, right?
Yeah, that repetition. And I was just like counseling talking to a family the other day, and the cell phone. So sometimes we give them tools to be safe, but yet it becomes a tool of like destruction.
Another vulnerability.
Yeah. And we with the child, we talked about is it better to keep the cell phone, or is it better not to have the cell phone? and having the child understand or make that choice and understand that it wasn't better to keep the phone. So the child actually gave up the phone because the phone, we were able to, instead of put the blame on the child, put the blame on the device. And then the child made the decision to say, you know what, I don't think I want this device because I can see where now it's a problem for me. So using kind of, sometimes, again, we don't know what we don't know. And in order to kind of bring it back to a functionable way to live, sometimes you have to take different actions. I no longer have video games in my house. And I mean, I used to have buy the PS3 and the PS4, and we were going to buy the PS5. And I was like, these things are just making my life crazy. He wants to get up at all hours of the night. He's taking devices, all sorts of things. So I eventually was able to kind of get him to, how's the word, realize that this is going to be out of the home, right? But I couldn't just pull it cold turkey because he would have trashed the entire house, right? So I had to say, do different things, get him very active. I now do way more activities outside. He's very physical. He's in everything, swimming, basketball, in everything. So he doesn't have time to play on the PS5. So, can we donate it? Can we donate this because there's a family who's in need, and they would, I think it would be a pretty cool thing to give them something that has dust all over it. Achoo. And then, so the PlayStation now got out of my home, and I'm just like, okay, I'll never be buying another one.
Yeah. And I think the challenge too is when you have other typical teens
absolutely
in the home.
Absolutely.
Balancing that.
Absolutely. My daughter says that all the time. Well, why? We still have internet. Internet is a huge problem in here. And I was told, you know what, you turn off the internet at night. And my daughter's like, no, why should I suffer? Because, you know what I mean? And she's right. She's like, I'm not abusing the internet. Why should I have to suffer? What if I have to do homework? Mm-hmm. And she was right. So we had to kind of, okay, TV in the common area is completely off. And then all devices, so iPads, I no longer let the Chromebook come home from school. It stays at school, because then that's another potential issue for us. All devices get locked up. He puts them inside of where they go. I lock the cabinet, our file cabinet, and they go to sleep. So our devices go to sleep too. But again, I started at a younger age. It's a lot harder when you have a teenager who's already kind of set in the ways. But I'm not going to say that it's not doable. We just have to be very creative. You have to get very creative. And again, talking to other parents with teenagers is very helpful too, because they have some strategies and tips too.
Anything else? Okay, I want to thank Jen and Ruth for coming and joining us today.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm going to send an email out to recap all this stuff with some links and all that good stuff. And we are looking to meet in person again. I've received numerous death threats from Tanya Rosardo about not meeting in person. So I will be on that to try to get us before the new year, actually physically be with each other. I know we're all over the place, but I think we can make it happen. Okay, just want to thank everyone. Glad you're here. Any questions or whatnot, give me a call after if you have anything pending from this. Sound good?
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We've enjoyed meeting you all.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
You can be off mute now.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I don't know if you guys have a little bit of extra time. I didn't want to ask while everyone was here if they wanted to head out, but I was just curious about the actual process that is diagnosing and getting the actual like proper diagnosis of FASD. Because I find a lot of the kids I've come in like contact with is like they have everything, and then you go for the assessment, and then we get told it's not, like they don't like they don't have the criteria and stuff. But I don't really know what the criteria is. Are you like, would you be able to give like just like a brief kind of run through how that process works?
We can't. So they like confirmation of alcohol exposure from the mother. If barring that, if someone has like a grandparent or a sibling can confirm that they did see alcohol exposure when, you know, the mother was pregnant, that can work too. However, as you can imagine, as you know, that is difficult. So, I mean, I know, Ruth, I don't know if you want to share a bit more about, you had a journey. You had a journey.
Yeah, so ours looked like it was all over the place, but I did not have admission from birth mom. However, she had multiple children who went through care who were diagnosed. So through that and through being able to, like, an agency was able to, I gave the permission for an agency to go through and look up the birth records, like the birth records. And through that, plus the confirmation of multiple children, they were able to kind of fast track us and get in. So we kind of just went right under the radar there, you know what I mean? But it was very, very difficult. And he was, I like I said earlier, he was misdiagnosed with several things. And this, the process of the diagnosis showed that he absolutely, there's no ADHD. He does not have an ADHD brain at all. Hence why the medications that we were giving him were actually making him do a lot of things that were not typical to what he would normally do. And yeah, it's hard. The diagnosis is hard, but what I like to tell people is it doesn't hurt if you think FASD, if you live FASD. What hurts is if you don't, and they do have it, but they don't have a diagnosis. That hurts. So looking through or training yourself to look through an FASD lens, you cannot go wrong across the board, because the FASD, like, we should have put in a chart. If I can find the chart, I'll send it to Tyler. And in it, it has FASD different, all the behavioral characteristics that can happen. And then it has other disabilities as well. And the FASD child has all of them, and the rest of them have most